All right, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. It's a question that's not really a question, but I think it's something to deal with, which is always, it's always good. And that is someone who desecrates God's name. Now, desecration of God's name, what does that mean in general? It means that one definition. Well, we have a strict definition. Strict definition is that a person does something, it's done in front of 10 Jews, right? 10 Jewish people. That's a technical definition, right? Of doing something wrong, and being called the desecration of God's name. Now, we throw around this term a lot. We mentioned it before that, if someone does something wrong, could be egregious, could be more egregious, less egregious, whatever it is. People say, oh, that's a desecration of God's name. Now, may not be a good thing, right? Very well could be not a good thing, but doesn't necessarily mean it's a desecration of God's name. One definition is where somebody does something, and by doing something, someone else is going to learn, the wrong way to act. Now that could also depend. That could also depend on where they're holding, certainly where they're holding in the world. But in general, someone who does something, a Jew, does something, and they do something wrong, and they mislead other people. They mislead them. They do the wrong thing also, because they learn from a person's actions. Now, this is a lot worse if it's somebody, let's say, that is influential. Someone, let's say, is rabbi or, whoever that, has a certain sphere, of influence. Now I mention this because the person can do something, again, depending on the level that they're on, and they not only could it be considered a desecration of God's name, even, we're going to call it by the strict definition, or person can be what we call a maneuver versus the Rabbi, right? Or I shouldn't say versus the Rabbi, right? That would be someone who's disgusting in the public. I meant maneuver, someone who is disgusting, something in God's eyes. They do something disgusting. They do something disgusting in God's eyes. Now, technically, there might not be anything wrong with what they did. Now, again, it may depend on the level, on where they're holding, but they could do something, let's say on Shabbos, talk about a Jew over here. So let's say on Shabbos, they do something wrong. They do something where technically speaking, they didn't do anything wrong. All right, so let's say they walk downtown, not far from their house, and they walk to a store. They walk to a store. They don't go inside. They don't go inside. They window shop. They're just looking. Now, technically speaking, did they do anything wrong? They didn't do anything wrong. But they may be called bebenuva v'rshus Torah. They may be called disgusting in the eyes of the Torah. Now, you tell me they didn't do anything wrong. But we always have to ask the question, is this what God wants from me? Is this what I should be doing? Right? Somebody, let's say, will videotape something on Shabbos, or they'll have, let's say their TV will stay on Shabbos, and they want to watch something. They don't change the channel; they leave it on. So, technically speaking, forget about using the timer. We'll make it very easy. They left the TV set on. Want to watch a certain show, a certain event, whatever it is. So they sit on the sofa and watch. Technically speaking, Have they done anything wrong? They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong over here. They haven't desecrated Shabbos. But they're called disgusting in God's eyes. Right? What we call menuvu b'reshus Torah. It's disgusting in God's eyes. Now again, person didn't drive there. Person didn't go anywhere, where it's forbidden. You're in the comfort of your own house. You're in the comfort of your own house. But you're doing something where it's not what God wants. Even if you're going to tell me, come on, I didn't do anything wrong. Right? We could probably figure out a million things that are wrong with watching whatever a person watched. Right? Spoke about that in Pirkei Avos after Shabbos last week. But even without going into all that, all that nitty gritty. This is not the spirit of Shabbos. So let's say, okay, maybe this applies to a Jew. Right? Let's say it's not on Shabbos. And they do something where, technically speaking, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with what they've done. Problem is, should they have done it? And if as the English would say, it looks a little bit dodgy, then it means they shouldn't have done it. They probably shouldn't have done it. Because then someone could say, oh, this person did it, so I can do it. Right? What's the problem? He's supposedly an Orthodox Jew. If he's doing such a thing, I should also be able to do such a thing. Now, two wrongs obviously don't make a right. But when we go in this world, and we live in this world, we have to realize, yesh din v'yesh dain. There's judgment, and there's a judge. So you're going to say, but I already know that. Right? We already understand. There's judgment. We already understand. There's a judge. But bottom line is, we have to be the best we can be. We have to strive to reach higher spiritual levels. Can't rest on our laurels. Can't let the evil inclination get us down. But there are things that I would say, are questionable. Questionable in the sense that maybe it shouldn't be done. Again, according to the person's level where they're holding spiritually in this world. Maybe it shouldn't be done. But at the end of the day, they did it. 100% they did it. The question is, how do we view it? Or, let's say better, how does God view it? Does God say, well, this person should know better, so we're going to throw the book at them, and they're going to get severely punished, and they'll pay a price? Or do we say, listen, they're a work in progress, they're starting from, a very low level, whatever the case is. So God says, okay, I'll cut you a little bit of slack. And if they shouldn't know better at all, then they'll still pay a price. It won't be as bad. Obviously, depending on what it is. Because if a person grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, no offense to anyone's a potato farmer grew up in Idaho. If someone, didn't know anything about anything, as long as it's not something egregious, you don't get a free pass. Right? We mentioned this many times. You don't get a free pass. But you will pay a price. As if you did it by accident. No, obviously, it'll depend, again, where the person's holding, what their intention was, etc. And God will look at it however he does. The problem is we see that people do things. They can be influential on others. They can be doing it for the sake of heaven. right? No ulterior motives. But there's something missing over here. What do I mean there's something missing? Because they'll say something, they'll do something where, to the average person who, let's say, doesn't know very much, they get misled. They can get misled. Now, if it's something that's pretty obvious, that's a different issue. Then, if a person wants to mislead themselves, they could. 100% they could. People do it all the time because they have a certain agenda. Like someone commented last week, one of my posts, someone says, what do you do with, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 23? With homosexuality. Do you hold that's forbidden? Yes, that was my answer. Then he came back, well, you really think God's going to kill such a person? So what's this whole thing? There's no Sanhedrin. There's no Jewish Supreme Court. There's no Beis Hamikdash, no temple. And people weren't killed in general anyway. But yeah, it's a severe din. It's a severe prohibition. Then I imagine, well, don't you think? God gave the Torah to Jewish people in front of 3 million people. Both Christians and Muslims agree. So maybe we're anti-pork, we're anti-other things. Anti-homosexuals, we're homophobic. Maybe. Could very well be. But in the end, God said it. That's the command. Well, so the person answers, that's not my type of God. Okay? So it's God made up in your own mind. Right? That we mentioned last week as well. Right? But people can have an agenda. And they can mislead people. Messianics, very well, mislead people. So no, we're really Jewish. We have all these Jewish customs. Yeah, and they sort of hide up behind the fact that they're worshiping JC also. Right? That's misleading. But someone could come along, bring in some teachings that maybe people are not aware of. Or maybe they are, but they, let's say, sneak it in. And they don't say it outright, that they're quoting a heretic or whatever. But they're using it within, let's say within their classes, whatever the case. So then someone doesn't necessarily hear it. Why? Because if they would say, they quote somebody everyone knows is a heretic, fine, then everybody knows. But if they say something that's really not necessarily off the rails, and they're not going to say, right, in this case, let's say, they don't say, well, homosexuality, it's not a problem to be homosexual or transgender or any of these things. They're not saying that, right? That someone obviously would pick up on. But they talk philosophically. They talk very smoothly, very smooth. I don't think smoothly is a word. They talk very smooth, and there's a subtlety or two or three that's thrown in, that 100% is thrown in, and it gets missed. But the person said it. Now, if the person said it, and then let's say down the road, person's listening, and they hear something, again, something subtle being thrown, and they say, wait a minute. Then they catch it. So if they catch it, and they hear it, and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? How can this be quoted? Right? This is something that doesn't make sense. This is something that's illogical. But if you missed it, you missed it. Right? So what's the point? So the point is somebody like that who may be a little bit, I don't know, what's the word? Sneaky, so to speak. Still holding certain things, certain opinions or certain beliefs, let's say better, that really the beliefs don't fit in with the Judaism. They don't fit in for non-Jews. But nonetheless, they're holding on. So now there's a question. Such a person, if somebody would do such a thing, then our reaction would be, can't listen to that. Don't care what they say otherwise. 99%, they could say, whatever they say is good. Could be true. Could have a lot of information, a lot of facts. Could be inspirational even. Well, what if there's 1% garbage there? So do we look at the 1% or more that's not on the up and up? And do we say that uproots the 99%? Or do we say 99% is good enough? Are you going to say, okay, so if they throw, something gets thrown in and you missed it or whatever, you finally catch it, does that really uproot everything else? Depends what it is. If it's something heretical, if they're quoting someone that has no believability, no credibility, zero, then why are you quoting it? Even if you don't do it directly. Wouldn't make sense to quote it. But if you do it, if you do it in a sneaky way, you do it under the table, you do it where people aren't paying attention, and you throw it in where it's going to go under the radar. So what are you doing? They're really giving over information. That's bad. But you're doing it in an underhanded way. And you're making yourself look good and saying all these other things, but really, some of it's based on things that are not true. Not just that they're not true, they're unproven. Right? Because if a person's going to say, listen, I have this great idea. I got this novel idea. I want to share it with everyone. And the person gives out this idea, whatever it is. And, maybe it doesn't sound so clear. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In general, they're not necessarily bringing proof towards it. So then what? So then someone's going to call them on it. Someone's going to say, come on, you're making the statement. Where's the proof? Where's the beef? Where's the proof over here? No, you don't understand. It'll get philosophical and this. No, but where's the proof? It doesn't add up. So if it doesn't add up, why are you saying it? That's a whole different thing. Why? Because the person's coming out and they're making a declaration. They're making a declaration of something where they have an agenda. Clear cut, they have an agenda. Right? But they're just not calling it out so direct, where what they're doing is hiding behind all the other stuff. Now, when a person does that, and they get caught red-handed, right? So obviously they should be confronted. Did you really say this? Did you really mean this? Right? This thing that has no credibility. That's what you're trying to pass on in between everything else. But you see, you have to have a little bit of knowledge. You have to have also eyes in the back of your head. You have to see what's being said. And then after seeing what's being said, see what it's really said. Right? Because people could pull the wool over our eyes if we're not careful. And that's the difference, as we get closer to Hanukkah. Hanukkah a few weeks away. So we don't make a rip-roaring party on Hanukkah like we do on Purim. Why? Because on Purim, what happened? Everybody knows what Haman was going to do. Everybody knows. Haman going to wipe out the Jewish people. Made clear, men, women, children. So you know to stay away from such a danger. When it comes to Hanukkah, when it comes to Hanukkah, what do the Greeks want? Greeks also made decrees. They for sure made decrees. But what was the essence of what the Greeks wanted? They wanted the Jews to be like them. They wanted the Jews essentially to be Greeks. Go to their gymnasiums, go to their movies, go to their sporting events, marry their women, All these things. So because of that, that's more dangerous. Right? It's a lot more dangerous. If they're coming out saying, listen, keep our religion or keep our laws, be like everybody else, or we're going to kill you. Don't be different or you're dead. It's a different issue. Right? Haman wanted to uproot the Jewish people altogether. Just like Hitler and Shamayim. May his name be blotted out. And many rabbinical authorities hold Hitler no different than Amalek. Was Amalek. Germans at that time were Amalek. So something like that, we know. We know what their agenda is. 100% we know their agenda. Someone who comes out being very friendly, very charismatic, be like us, don't worry, everything's good, come to all our things, be a Greek. No, that's a problem. Why is that a more serious problem? It's a lot more serious problem because our evil inclination can go crazy here. Say, yeah, it's really not so bad. What's really the big deal? It's not going to affect me so much. The evil inclination has its way. It has its ways of fooling us. And saying, it's not going to be so bad. Not going to be so bad at all. When the reality is, if you look at the end results, what's the end result? Assimilation into marriage. Right? The single biggest problem facing Jewish people today. So that the fight against is a lot more difficult. So you can have forces in the world that are much more underhanded, but not as direct. In other words, our senses get dull for any number of reasons. And we succumb and we give in. We don't give in 100%. Say, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, come on. I would never intermarry. Who would think of intermarrying? Like, that's the worst thing you could do. I'm not going to do that. Right? But over time, what happens? Your resolve becomes weaker because the more you have to do with secular society, right? You go to high school, you go to university, you meet people at work, different things. See, but I'm not going to go that far. Why not? Person's going to take step by step here. Could be a small step, doesn't matter. Person takes a small step, and then the whole thing explodes. By the Reform movement, we use the Reform movement as an example. The Reform movement was the first thing they wanted to change in the synagogue. Right? They wanted to change the bima. Right? From being in the center or whatever, changing from where it was. And they wanted to take out the prayer we say when we take out the Torah, that's in Aramaic. So no one understands Aramaic anyway. And we don't have the great academies, Babylonian, other places. So really, it shouldn't apply. So we shouldn't say it. Right? That's where it started. Started with what I would say relatively minor things. But if it's something that's minor, it could explode. It could snowball. Their intention, let's just call a spade, their intention was to uproot Torah. That there's nothing talking about. But they didn't do it outright at the beginning. They did it over, a period of time. It was a slow process, but what was their goal? Make no mistake, their goal was to uproot Torah. Even though I would say they're not, conservative movements like 10 years behind, even though a lot of rabbis in the conservative movement at the beginning were really Orthodox and then sort of petered out. But really, they're not much different. But the way they started it, right? And that's what my Rebbe would say. The way they started, totally different. No question. So I would still disagree, even though that is true. I don't think they're that much different today, but okay. Right? It doesn't really matter. So the reform movement, their agenda, 100% clear. 100% clear. Everybody knew there was a threat. Everybody knew there was a threat. Conservative movement, much less. Why much less? There were still Orthodox rabbis there. They were still, quote unquote, adhering to Jewish law. You know, they were misleading people. But it was subtle. Right? It wasn't direct. You know, years later, okay, it became very clear what they were doing. And then they also became, you know, a movement, quote unquote, without Jewish law. So again, if you know what you're fighting against, it's out in the open, it's clear. It's one thing. Then we know how to guard ourselves. Then we know what we're up against. But if someone's a little bit dodgy, a little bit sneaky over here, and subtly they throw in things here, throw in things there, but you don't see what their agenda, that's a lot more dangerous. A lot more dangerous. Because the heresy doesn't come out. You know, you miss it. You know, you're listening, everything sounds good. You know, something, you know, gets thrown in there. You know, but it's not said explicitly. It's said in different language. It's covered over. Different issue. Totally different issue. Now, if that would be the case, we said before, let's say 99% of what the person says, probably an exaggeration. Well, let's say 99% is good, and every so often they throw in these things. That means that whole thing comes down like a deck of cards. Because we always say, if we find a flaw in any book, quote unquote, from God, that is claimed to be from God, one flaw, one single flaw, the whole thing falls. The whole thing gets knocked down. Right? Like the secular Quranists will say, come on, you know, if you're not going to help the Noahites, send them to Islam. We'll make them Islam lights. Right? Because we're the closest thing to Noahites. Maybe true. But all I have to do is find one thing in the Noahide laws that they don't hold of, then that knocks them out. But I had a very simple answer. Why would I send them to something I don't believe is true? So yeah, what do you think isn't true about Islam? I mentioned a few things. Mentioned a few weeks ago. Oh, that's only the narrative. It's only the narrative. Yeah, I found a major contradiction. 2 major contradictions. You want me to find more? Right? Someone who says it's the book of God, you find a major contradiction, no answer. That's it. It's not true. If I say the same thing about the Torah, God forbid, find a contradiction. You find, you know, the Torah says that a fish that has scales will always have fins. If it has fins, it'll have scales and vice versa. You find one fish that has scales and not fins, Torah can't be true. Or in the laws of kashrus, you find an animal that either chews its cuds, you know, and doesn't have split hooves or vice versa. There's only a handful that have one sign to be a kosher animal. You know what? Moshe Rabbeinu was Dr. Doodle. How do you know all this? And if you find one that doesn't, you find another exception, you got a problem. That would show the Torah is not true. Right? And again, even if 99%, you would tell me the Torah is true. The 1% that's not true uproots everything. So someone's got one heretical view, let's say, and everything else they do kedasu kedin, they do it like the, you know, like the letter of the law. So if that's the case, then what's the problem? Because the rest of it, because that 1% uproot to everything. And that whatever they say, you can't listen to. Because in Coffman's language, it's a travesty of a mockery of a shame. But you're going to say, come on, 1%. You had 1%. So what? but that has the potential to lead astray. And if that has the potential to lead astray, to give bad information, it doesn't matter if it's 1% or 0.5%. It makes listening to such a person forbidden. I mean, it's much easier. It's much easier today, right? You don't have so many people like that. You have people that are obvious what they say. They don't hide. They make it obvious. What they say is just ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. We have to do things that are on the, that are on the up and up. Even as we mentioned at the beginning, even if a person would not desecrate Shabbos, let's say, I'll give an example. Let's say someone had tickets, I don't know, to go to an art museum. And there's an eruv. They bought the tickets before Shabbos. There's not a problem with carrying. Not a problem going on the subway, traveling. They walk down the street, they're at an art museum. Are they allowed to go? Let's say, we'll make it even easier. No infrared lights, walking in, you're not doing anything to desecrate Shabbos. All around, you walk in this art museum, not a problem. No issur. It's not forbidden at all. Nothing you've done is forbidden. Right? So the rabbis are going to say, you know what? Even if that's the case, there's nothing forbidden. You are called menuva b'rshus Torah. You are called disgusting in God's eyes. It's disgusting, period. Doesn't matter if you didn't do anything forbidden or not. Well, let's say there are forbidden images you're going to see. That'd be sure be an issue. Could be all kinds of other issues. But even if they're not, this has an effect on us. That's not the way you celebrate Shabbos. Person, wants to camp out somewhere, they're allowed to. That's not desecration of Shabbos. You want to go to a campsite? Technically, okay, you should be part of a community, whatever. You're going to pray on your own. Okay. I guess there are worse things you could do. So fine. In that case, there's no desecration of Shabbos. But if you're doing other things that's disgusting in God's eyes, what do I care? It's not desecration of Shabbos here. It's disgusting in God's eyes, period. But they always say fact is greater than fiction. It's just hard to imagine where, even if a person doesn't do it in public, we imagine a person does it in their house. Nobody sees it. Nobody sees it. So let's say, back in the day when I was growing up, whenever that was, back in the day, you had, when it came to basketball, Celtics, Lakers, Larry Bird against Magic Johnson. I'm aging myself. So let's say 7th game of the championship, 7th game NBA Finals is on Friday night. Got the TV set up. You're all set to watch the final game. And there's a great Shabbos. And do anything wrong, technically. Right, so now, sit with my family, have a Shabbos meal, go watch the game. Right, no contradiction. I didn't do anything wrong, technically. I'd be considered disgusting in God's eyes, okay? But technically speaking, I didn't desecrate Shabbos. TV was on, same channel, never moved it, never clicked anything on, volume's not higher, everything's the same. Did I do anything wrong? Technically, no. Now, what if I would come on Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, Sunday, and what would happen to make a video? I make a video and say, yeah, had the best Shabbos, unbelievable, so spiritual, and guess what? My Celtics beat the Lakers. Bird overcame Magic, unbelievable. What an unbelievable game I saw Friday night. I sit there and brag. Me and the whole family watched there. Watched the whole game. We started running around the house saying, we're number one. We're number one. And I make a video and I put it out. That's not being disgusting in God's eyes. You're right. I didn't do anything wrong. Technically, I didn't do anything wrong. But I'd be out there bragging. Bragging, I watched Game 7 on Shabbos. I didn't do anything wrong. No desecration of Shabbos. I should tell the whole world. I was in my finest Shabbos clothes. Had my long coat. Was wearing my hat. Rooting for my team. People want to brag about that? Okay. What does God think over here? What is God going to think over here? One thing a person did it, even in the confines of their own house. They do it in the confines of their own house, fine. I mean, I'm not saying fine. Let's say they did it. But now I'm going to sit there and brag. Why would I brag about that? I'd rather brag and say, stayed up all night. I went through 25 pages of Gemara, back and forth, this, that. Knew it like the back of my hand, went to synagogue, unbelievable uplifting experience. Inspire people that way. If that would be the truth. I'm going to inspire people telling them the game I watched on Shabbos. See, that's more direct. That's much easier. That's much easier to call out. Why? Because they do it direct. They're bragging about it. Again, even if there's no desecration of Shabbos. Right? So somebody like that, I'm going to listen to because they're bragging about what they did. But if someone does it more subtly, which is harder to figure out, they look very distinguished. And all that. Speak a good game. Very well. But there's something wrong here. Because the bottom line is the base is crooked. If the base is crooked, then the whole thing is crooked. It's kind of like setting up, not exactly, but, kind of like setting up a three-legged table. What happens if you put 3 legs on the table? Well, very simple. Ain't going to stand. You're right. It's not going to stand. Sheker, lies do not stand. Probably going to get caught eventually. Right? It's only a matter of one. Right? But it's very easy to, pick at the fact that, people say whatever they say. And that's easy. But if it's done in an underhanded way, and it's not as clear, different issue. Because then I would say, if that's being done, but everything else sounds good, then what's going to come out of it is the thing's going to become cracked. Give another example. When the Zionists started, and they had this religious, what was called then the Mizrahi movement, the Zionistic movement. They had their own rabbis, etc. And Rabbi Chaim Brisker and others said it should have nothing to do with them. Someone came to Rabbi Chaim Brisker, one of these rabbis coming to speak. And it was very eloquent speaker. And Rabbi Chaim Brisker said, I'm not going. Because he said in the end, there's going to be a tremendous travesty. This is going to come out of all this. He said, I'm not going. But he said, he knows and he speaks and it is. The Chaim Brisker answer very simple. He said, if there's a crack in the foundation, the whole foundation is cracked. It's not just a little bit of crack here. The crack's going to go down through the whole wall. It's going to destroy the foundation. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yikam Damoy, God should avenge his blood, in his work, Epics of the Messiah. Very short pamphlet he wrote about the end of days. And he said, One of the things he said about Jews going astray from communism, secularism, socialism, all these different isms, democracy. And he said, the desecration of Shabbos in the land of Israel. So he said, why would I go live in the land if they're polluting the land? They're destroying it spiritually. He says there's no mitzvah to live in the land in such a case because of the influence. Right? So what do we see? We see that, when it comes to information, when it comes to giving over information, there has to be integrity. I've seen enough, which I would say that, there are certain things you cannot make up. I told the story before, someone selling, someone putting their name or name of proper rabbinic supervision on wine that was watched by non-Shomer Shabbos Jews, which makes the wine invalid. No one can drink it. This person said all kinds of things about me, and I'm drawing his blood, I'm doing this, and I'm not making money from it. Right? Someone else says, hey, you're taking away his livelihood. Oh, somebody's lying. Somebody clear as day is lying. Right? Either the one says I'm taking away his living, doesn't know he's not making money from it, or the other one's lying saying he's not making money when he really is, which is probably the case. Well, see, there's a major difference here. The difference is person who sent someone to watch the wine, that didn't keep Shabbos, wasn't keeping Shabbos at the time. So this person already had track record. This person already caused all kinds of damage. All kinds of damage. So people knew who this person was. People were just afraid to stand up to him. Right? So, in that case, it cost me my job, which had nothing to do with this. Because I was teaching in school. This had anything to do with anything. But, see, somebody else, well, they're also pretty much out there as well. So, pretty easy to know, what they stood for. And I heard my own ears, even before I started teaching the school, a person made some comments, basically just about heretical. I mean, there were heretical statements, and I said, I got to be very careful here because I'm going to be walking a fine line. Yeah, and it cost me. It definitely cost me. But somebody like that was a snake, and they hide themselves very well. Those are the people you got to be aware of. Much more aware of. But in this case, it didn't matter because people were aware anyway. But they cover their tracks very well. In different ways. So, someone who does something like, as we mentioned, in the Reform movement, is more dangerous. Sorry, that's much less dangerous. Because we know what we're up against. We know what they stand for. Come with the conservative movement, when they started, that was totally different. Why was it totally different? Because they were much more traditional, seen to be Orthodox, a lot of the rabbis. And then it got watered down. Okay, that's worse. That's worse because they're not playing with a full deck. They're not showing you their hands over here. They're not doing that. What they're doing is they're misleading the public when the public doesn't even know what they're doing. And that's more dangerous. All right, the Rambam in the Laws of Repentance lists a whole number of people considered heretics. Many different things. One case is that you have somebody who believes in everything Moshe Rabbeinu says except for one thing. It's a heretic. Or, maybe doesn't believe in one prophecy of the prophet or something like that. He's a heretic. There are different levels. But see, we have to be 100% Jews or JITs or Noahites. Right? It has to be 100%. Right? There's no fooling around over here. There's no 99%. You mean 99% doing all the right things, 1% you can lose your portion of the world to come. Doesn't mean we don't have trials, doesn't mean we don't fail at things. It doesn't mean a lot of things. We have to work hard. We've mentioned this many times. But at the same time, there cannot be any discrepancies. A person can say, they shouldn't say this, but a person in theory can say, that the Jewish people have to believe in the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. So let's say they get 12 out of 13. They believe in 100%. The thing about resurrection of the dead, they're a little bit iffy. Right? They don't really believe so well. Or let's say better, they don't believe resurrection of the dead. But everything else they believe in coming to the Messiah, prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, reward and punishment, God knows the thoughts of all men, etc. Torah is absolute, doesn't change. Okay, these are very good. But if you don't believe in one of them, or any of them, then you lose your status of a Jew. Doesn't mean you can't repent. There's always repentance. But all it takes is one thing. So okay. So a person will say, that, 12 out of 13, 12 out of 13 is not so bad. All right, so let's do the math over here. All right, do 12 out of 13 is 92.3%. That's pretty good. That's pretty good, 93%. 92.3. I said 99%. So in this case, you have 12 out of 13. It doesn't matter. One thing that a Jew doesn't believe in the 13 principles, you're out. You lose your status as a Jew. Doesn't mean I can't get it back. Doesn't mean I can't repent. But you say it's only one thing. So you're going to say, well, it depends what it is. Totally depends what it is. But again, I'll ask the question. If a person does something that really, technically, there's nothing wrong with, but they're considered disgusting in God's eyes at the same time, what does it matter, all the other things you've done, unless you repent over here? It depends what it is. Depends on the level of the person. Right? Depends on a number of factors. But if a person observes Shabbos, and if I were to be out there bragging, I watched Game 7, NBA Finals. Anything wrong with it? Technically, no. Maybe I should have been learning Torah, doing, other positive things on Shabbos than this. But technically, I didn't do anything wrong. So depending on the person's level, you'll say, okay, for so-and-so, it's probably not even transgression. Right? Depending where they're holding. Someone holding at a higher level, yeah, that's a problem. This will be a problem. So we got to be careful what we hear, what we see. We have to know if something is authentic or it's not authentic. Someone points out, they want to convert a person reading 4 books. Yeah. You go to Reform, you read a couple. Conservative, you upgrade, you read a couple more. That's what it is. That should be a red flag. Total red flag. Well, there's some people, had somebody tell me this. They already paid for Reform conversion. They understand that the reality is a Reform conversion not worth anything. But they still had classes to go to because they already paid for it. So I said, forget about it. Move on. No, but I already paid for it. Couldn't get it out of his head. So I said, so let's say you didn't give money to charity here. You lost money. Move on. But if you already know it's false, then why are you going to go through it just to have the piece of paper? Piece of paper is not worth anything it's written on. Not worth anything. Or that Reformed conversion, conservative conversion, doesn't matter. Piece of paper is worth nothing. No, but, I just want to finish. Okay? But if it doesn't mean anything, why would you do it? There's something else going on, not just about money. I mean, it does sound kind of silly. Why would a person go to that length if they didn't believe in it? Because they lost a few $100. And they lost $500. They lost $1,000. Okay, it's a loss. Take the loss, move on. But what you're listening to is heresy. Isn't it worth it to take the loss and listen to this garbage? That's what it would seem like. So there are people willing to do something just to have the status. If it's just to have the status, forget about coming to the land of Israel, anything else. They just want to have the status. I want to be considered a Jew, according to who? According to us, you won't be considered a Jew. But fine. But I just want to have that. I just want to have that piece of paper. But you know and I know that it's really not worth that much. I know, but I want to have the status. There's some people who go so far as to say, I don't need that. I don't even need to go through conversion because I'm a Jew at heart. And I'm more Jewish than most people. It doesn't help either. No matter what you think in your heart. God doesn't care what I think in my heart, per se. Is it permissible? It's not permissible. Did you do the right thing? You didn't do the wrong thing. Right? Or you did the wrong thing. A woman can make a claim, it'd be a false claim, and we're gonna keep this clean, keep this clean. A woman can say, yeah, I'm a little bit pregnant. What do you mean you're a little bit pregnant? Could be they meant I'm only 2 months along, or whatever. I'm only a month along, or whatever the case. That's what they, no such thing. Either you are or you're not. Either test is positive or negative. There's nothing in between. Here's my fanatical side coming down. It's either one way or the other. So if you want to do the right thing, do it. If you don't want to do it, fine. But if you're going to do certain things and brag about it, the things that are done that even technically speaking, if they're not wrong, I mean, there's an issue here. I mean, it's not even subtle. But if someone's doing it underhandedly, that's a different issue. Then they're being sneaky, right? Then it's or snarky, right? That's a little bit hard to fathom, a little bit hard to see. But guess what? Person hears that and says, wait a minute, this doesn't jive over here, right? Doesn't jive over here. Doesn't make sense. But it gets snuck in. You miss it, right? If you're not paying attention, that's worse. That's a lot more dangerous. A lot more dangerous. Because then you're being misled, but you don't know it. The one thing, if it's obvious, you can have people in different quote unquote, movements or whatever, and they're being misled. They don't even know they're being misled because they don't know anything. But they themselves being misled. Right? Even a reformed rabbi, conservative rabbi, be over Torah prohibition, causing others to go astray. One of the things we beat our chest for every Yom Kippur. Doesn't matter what they know or they don't know. They're leading other people astray. Some more, some less. It doesn't matter. But if a person knows, and they know Torah, they understand Torah, then how could they do it? Again, people have an agenda. People have an agenda. So there are a lot of people out there, it's like a lot of Christians, a lot of Jews out there don't know anything about their religion. Nothing. So they're being misled themselves by their own agenda, by their own ideas. Right? Torah made up in their own mind. They're also going to pay a price. If Noah Weinberg, of blessed memory, gave a parable. Your 6-year-old comes home, he's wearing these old clothes. He says, Mom, Dad, I'm Napoleon. Come on, can't be Napoleon. Your name is Barrows. Like, yeah, I was just kidding. 30-year-old son comes home wearing this old uniform, funny hats, all dusty and all that. And he says, I'm Napoleon. Come on, how could you be Napoleon? Napoleon 500 years ago, this, that. How could you be Napoleon? He says, no, I'm Napoleon. Incognito. I'm in hiding. But I'm really Napoleon. Okay. The more a person gets engrossed in their own agenda, the more things they make up or they put around it in order for them to justify what they do, even if it doesn't make any sense at all. Because they have an agenda. And people will do that. They may not admit it, right? But for sure they do it. And then on the other hand, you have people that are outright liars who mislead others, claim to be something that they're not. So there has to be integrity, and people have to take responsibility. Because, being disgusted in God's eyes, even technically if a person didn't do anything wrong, can be certainly a desecration of God's name. Someone can say, hey, this person did it. He seems to keep Torah and mitzvahs. I can also do it. Right? So someone's going to take my example. Forget about watching Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Whatever. They want to watch something Friday night. Whatever it is. So what's going to be in that case? Also, people are going to say, wow, if he can do it, why can't I do it? That, according to some of the commentators, that's a desecration of God's name. Even if it's not the strict definition. Because people get the wrong vibes. They're getting the wrong thing over here. They're being told something's not true. They're being misled. They're going to say, but if he can do it, it seems to be okay for him, so I should also be able to do it. Now, again, for that person, they technically didn't do anything wrong. So someone comes along and says, well, I can also do it. That's called the desecration of God's name. One definition. So the Rambam says in the laws of repentance, you know what the punishment is for that? Punishment is, first of all, you have to repent on Yom Kippur. You have to go through Yom Kippur. You have to suffer. You have to go through suffering in this world. And everything's held in suspended animation. You don't get atonement until you die. It's the worst of all transgressions. Yes, they tell me, what about corporal punishment? What about desecration of Shabbos? Yeah, that's also bad. But their death is an atonement. One shot's over. In this case, it's not enough to get atonement. Death only partially atones here, if that. You had to go through suffering. You had to go through Yom Kippur. Everything's suspended in suspended animation over here. You don't get atonement till the person dies. That's a lot more severe. But a person doesn't think in those terms. A person thinks, wow, I'm not doing anything wrong. Right? And this is very far reaching. And not just about Shabbos. It's about anything a person does that someone could, get bad character traits from them. Not necessarily leading them astray. People know, it's not permissible to drive like a maniac. People know that. When someone sees an Orthodox Jew dressed like an Orthodox Jew, driving like a maniac, they'll say, hey, why can't I drive like that? Or they'll say, oh, look at him. He drives like a maniac. He's an Orthodox Jew. Okay, we are put on a higher pedestal. 100% that's true. But if someone's going to learn bad character traits from us in what we do, that's a desecration of God's name, according to one definition. So we have to be careful how we speak, especially to others when we're in public or we're not in public. How we act when we're in the store, standing in line somewhere, driving, whatever. Hygiene. I'll throw that out there. Why some people are not stringent in that, I'll never know. Well, I think I have one answer. It's because no one ever called them on it. No one ever taught them. I think it would be pretty obvious. You got a cold that you're coughing, you cover your mouth. I think that's pretty obvious. For some people, that's not obvious. Again, I'm not sure why. It could be that's the grading Coffman 615th commandment. Don't be a moron. I think that's pretty obvious. Why don't some people do it? Either no one ever called them on it, or basically they were never taught. So again, you tell me, okay, this is something where, this might be something extraneous, might be something, on the outside, but really on the inside, they're really God-fearing, they keep a lot of mitzvahs. Okay. It doesn't excuse it. I'm saying someone sneezes in your face, that'd be pretty bad, pretty gross. Right? But, derech eretz kidmul Torah. Derech eretz comes first. The way we look, the way we present ourselves. Listen, even for non-Jews, I would say this is obligatory. They wouldn't get killed for it. Wasn't hygiene something pretty important? Should be. I call it a moral imperative, no question. But see, things should go hand in hand. If a person keeps Torah and mitzvahs, another thing we should be able to see from them. How they speak, how they act. Doesn't mean we're perfect by any stretch. But if a person's working on themselves, they see, person got their eretz, treat other people properly. They wait in line, they're courteous, but when one person does something wrong, which we mentioned many times, everybody else gets blamed. All other Orthodox Jews get blamed. That's racism. So we're our own worst enemy. Just because one person did something wrong, what does that have to do with me? Now, if I did it, okay. You can have claims against me also. But if I didn't do it, what does it have to do with anything? And I've heard this a lot from a lot of different people. Oh, I can't believe these Orthodox Jews did this. When they say Orthodox Jews, they're also talking about me. So a number of times I said, but I didn't do that. My family didn't do that. Oh, no, that's different. So a whole community gets maligned by a few people. Could be a lot of people, doesn't matter. Even by one person did something wrong. A guy goes to get his car serviced, car fixed. They say, we're not servicing you. Your people caused COVID to spread. This guy was careful. His family was careful. Maybe some other people weren't careful. Maybe. Even if I would agree, let's say. What does that have to do with him? Where do you get off maligning the whole group? You say that about blacks, you're in trouble. You are in trouble. Say it against almost any other minority. They'll string you up. Say it against Jews. No, that's okay. That's okay. So we have thick skin. We're already used to this. That means we have to be impeccable. Our character traits, we have to go beyond. Right? So no one can say anything. No one can even have a question of what we've done, or God forbid, not have done, to come in a question. But I've heard many people say, wow, it's such an awesome responsibility, to be a Jew. I wish most Jews thought that. And most Orthodox Jews thought that. It is a tremendous responsibility. And if we don't go about doing what we need to do at a proper level, we're going to get maligned. And we deserve it. Because we are held to a higher standard. But for some people, it doesn't matter. For some people, they're just going to do what they do anyway. Hygiene? Nah. A rabbinic scholar, use an example. Rabbinic scholar walks outside and he spilled something on his shirt. He's got a stain on his shirt. Before he walked outside, he's got to change it. Why? Because he represents Torah. And if he represents Torah, you can't look like a slob. What about somebody else? Also bad if they represent Torah. But if you're a rabbinic scholar, I'm not saying you just spilled it while you're outside. It's a different issue. You can't change it now. Right? You can't change it now. Fine. But if your shirt, it's got a stain, and you walk outside with it and people see it, well, you know what the punishment is? Death penalty. You got to say death penalty. Why? Why is it so severe? Because you represent Torah. It's like you're a walking Sefer Torah. Imagine take out a Torah scroll, you unroll it, it's got like ketchup on the side mixed in. Doesn't nullify it. Right? It's got a stain from, I don't know, someone spilled something or whatever. It's got a stain. That's not desecration for the Torah. So someone's going to say, but it didn't do anything wrong, technically. The Torah's still kosher. It didn't mess up any letters. Totally didn't mess up any letters. You're right, but why should I use the Sefer Torah now? It's blemished. So you got to clean it. You might have to rewrite a whole column, whatever it is. And a rabbinic scholar is no different than a Torah scroll. So the Gemara says many times that stupid Babylonians will stand up for a Torah scroll, but they won't stand up for rabbinic scholars who represent the Torah scroll. Call them stupid. Bavlim, Tipshim, stupid Babylonians. Not my language. The language of the Talmud. So you understand the integrity of Torah. If you understand the integrity of Torah, how can you walk out looking like a slob? And see people, maybe they're not tucked in, they're disheveled. For a guy, okay, looking in the mirror like a woman, make sure everything's okay. You got to make sure you're not disheveled. If someone's sitting and learning and they represent Torah, you got to be careful. Or else it could be liable for death penalty. So there's a lot to uphold. And we're our own worst enemy. But it doesn't matter. This is what we have to do. Because it makes everybody else look bad. A secular Jew can take a look at one person. Doesn't matter. One person, they look disheveled, they're going to think, oh, all Orthodox Jews, this, that, and the other thing. Now, that's wrong and that's racist. That 100%, we'll call the person out. It's wrong. Not allowed to do that. Imagine if you did that against blacks. That's racism 101. But even so now what about that Jew? Look what he just caused. He caused they can cause a sanctification of God's name or desecration of God's name. So you got to be careful when we go outside and how we look and how we treat others. We have to be impeccable. Do we always live up to that? I'm not going to say we do. I hope we do. Right? But unfortunately, there's so many things people have got caught on doing. They're not thinking. We have to be careful. Someone asked a technical question here. As a Noahide studying Hebrew, that the alphabets are holy. If you use what do you do with the book? You can bury it. If you're not going to use it. Any Torah goes into Geniza, it's called Geniza. Right? Either they have a place. If you don't have a place, then that you'd have to bury it. But if you had a Geniza means it's have like a huge box, like almost like a dumpster where people throw in, let's say, parsha sheets, other things in Hebrew and English that has Torah in it, and it basically gets sent to landfill. It gets buried. Essentially gets buried. Right? If you're not gonna use it, can't be abused, you can't just throw it in the trash. 100% you can't just throw it in the trash. So a person has, let's say, a Torah book, right? You're not gonna use it, so yeah, it should be buried. There is truth to the fact that the letters are holy. True. That even the alphabet, some people say that, let's say, Hebrew newspaper shouldn't take it into the bathroom for that reason. Shouldn't read it in the bathroom. Others would say it doesn't matter if the letters are holy or not. The words that they printed are garbage because of the newspaper, right? So they will hold not that way. So it could be, a book on the Aleph Beis, yeah, maybe it should be buried. The letters are intrinsically holy. It's not going to have, worse things, I hope, than what's in the newspaper. So yeah, it could be buried. That's what I would say. That's what I would say on that. So again, anyone who wants to be a Jew, JIT, or even a Noahide less because they're not known to be keeping the Noahide laws. We have to have integrity. We have integrity in how we speak. We have to have integrity, how we act in business. And a lot of business things are Torah prohibitions if we don't do them right. So, we have to have integrity. Why some people blow that off and they don't care? Again, I don't have a good answer. Either they just don't care, or, they just never been taught. Forget about business. Business, when it comes to money, people do what they want. That's a whole nother issue. Right? We're just talking about, hygiene, dress, in general. No, now someone has an important job. Use that as an example. Someone works on Wall Street. You gotta wear, 2-piece suit, 3-piece suit, whatever it is. Double-breasted, not double-breasted. And let's say on your vest, if that still goes on today, you have a stain on your vest. And you weren't paying attention, you went to work, had a nice stain on your vest. I'd like to hear what the repercussions would be. You walk in, your boss ain't gonna be too happy. Because, hey, why didn't you change your vest? What are you doing? You look like a slob. This is how you represent the company? I'm not gonna say they're gonna get fired for it. But a person has to be dressed impeccably, and they're representing the company, etc. Can't look like a slob. I mean, you may get fired for that. That's pretty egregious, right? You may not. You might just get warned. You might get disciplined. You gotta be careful. How we should think this and how we act and how we speak and how we do all these things. Because we don't want to give the non-Jews out there or anybody the right to say, oh, Orthodox Jews, this, that, and the other thing. You're right, Esav hates Yaakov, and it's always going to be anti-Semitism until the Messiah comes. That's all very true. But at the same time, we have to realize, why add fuel to the fire? We don't want to add fuel to the fire. We don't want to give them anything to say, except for the fact, thank God, his Rebbe taught him Torah. Thank God his father taught him Torah. That we want to give them. That they should praise us. But to give them fodder, to give them fuel over here to say, oh, look, see these Orthodox Jews, this and that. Got to be very, very careful. Because we represent Torah. I wouldn't say, if someone's not on the level and they're just learning, I wouldn't say that's a reason not to convert. You're right, it's an awesome responsibility. But even if it's an awesome responsibility, we still got to do what we need to do. Try and be the best we can be. We got to be more careful. When someone says, well, I'm really not on that level, I want to reach a much higher level. You may never reach that higher level. But you got to be careful anyway in what you do. Because we are the ambassadors to the world. We are the light unto nations. Not that we always do what we're supposed to do. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to try, and we have an obligation to work hard. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. No questions. I'm going to stop here. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, or at Michael Chaim Coffman. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Otherwise, you can send me an email, rabbichaimcoffman@gmail.com, RBBICHIMCOFFMAN@gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day, middle of the day.